The NFL has finally finished its 2022 season, so that only leaves one thing, and that's the playoffs.
Playoffs? You kidding me? Playoffs?
That's right, the playoffs. And in this video, I'm going to tell you how I think they're going to shake out. To start, we're going to be in the AFC. The first game is the Buffalo Bills playing host to the Miami Dolphins. Since both of these teams are in the same division, they've already played each other twice. The first time being all the way back in Week 3 in Miami, where the Dolphins won 21-19. And then the Bills played host to the Dolphins in Week 15, where the Bills won 32-29. Now, although both teams have already played twice, and you kind of get some familiarity there are still some glaring things that make an obvious winner here. The first key to this game is who's going to be quarterback for the Dolphins. If the Dolphins don't have Tua as their quarterback, they're just not the same team. Ever since they've had Teddy Bridgewater or even Skylar Thompson play, they just can't seem to create that same spark that they had when Tua was around. Another big issue for the Dolphins is their receiving defense. The Fins' pass D is 26th worst in the league, whereas the Bills have been absolutely killing it, having the second best passing O in the whole league. So when you add in the fact that we don't know who's going to be starting at quarterback for the Dolphins, their defense has been one of the worst in the league, and the fact that the weather is going to be absolutely cold, mixed with the fact that the Dolphins cannot play in the cold weather, I think the Bills cruise their way past the first round, beating the Dolphins 27-17. The next game is going to be the Bengals versus the Ravens. Now this one is going to be a very interesting game to watch, especially since they both played just last week. Now the Bengals did win both games in the regular season, but I'm not going to write the Ravens off just that easy. And the main reason is because it's a back-to-back for both teams. Another big plus for the Ravens is that they should have Lamar Jackson back, who's been out for the last few weeks due to injury. And if we're going to be honest, the Ravens offense is nothing without him. The fact that he is still technically a free agent at the end of the season makes me believe that he's going to really ball out. Now as for the Bengals, they obviously made it to the Super Bowl last year, so they're looking to repeat that. The main thing that they needed in the offseason was some offensive line help for Joe Burrow. And they got exactly that. Couple that with a defense that has improved since last year, Cincinnati is just not going to go out in the first round this year. I see this game being a typical AFC North game. It will be a hard-nosed, muck-and-grind, non-stop battle from beginning to end. But I do see the Bengals coming out on top 17-13. The last first-round game of the AFC is the Jaguars playing host to the Chargers. Now both of these teams did play once already back in Week 3 in LA, but the Chargers were very injured and the Jaguars just seemed to have their day as they beat the Chargers 38-10. And even though the game is going to be in Jacksonville this time, I do not expect this game to be that much of a blowout. In fact, the Chargers were so hurt in that first game that I expect their offense to really bounce back and take notes from that first game. Seeing the Jaguars in the playoffs this year is really cool to see, especially since they've not been a good team over the last decade plus. But I do think the lack of playoff experience is really going to hurt them this time. And even though both teams really don't have any playoff experience, I think that's going to hurt the Jaguars more than it does the Chargers. I think Justin Herbert and Keenan Allen and Austin Eckler and that whole offense are finally going to take that next step to being as good as we thought they would be for the last few years. When you look at the numbers on how these teams stack up against each other, they're pretty even, so I expect it to be a close game. However, I do expect the Chargers to walk out of Duval with the win, 27-20. Moving over to the NFC, for the first game, we got the 49ers taking on the Seahawks. Now the Seahawks have had an absolute fairy tale season. First, they get rid of Russell Wilson. Then, they take Geno Smith, who has had a very subpar career to most, and they sneak into the final wildcard spot on the last day of the season. Now, if you're thinking this fairy tale is going to continue past this first round, unfortunately, you'll be sorely mistaken. This 49ers team is just so good. They're even on their third-string quarterback, who was the very last pick in last year's draft. And he looks like he's been in the league for 5 years. And not only that, but they traded for one of the best running backs in the last decade. And when you add on the fact that they have one of the best defenses in the whole league, this team is going to be trouble. So although most playoff games end up being tight battles regardless of seeds and records, this game is not going to be one of those. I expect the 49ers to absolutely kill the Seahawks, with the final score being 31-10. Next up, we have the Vikings playing host to the Giants. Now, the one time these teams met earlier in the season was back in Week 16, where the Vikings just barely squeezed out a win, 27-24. Now, out of all of the first round matchups, this one is easily the hardest to predict. Because on one hand, you have the Minnesota Vikings, who have a very good record, and their play has been good. But they've also played in so many close games that it's just so hard to trust this team, especially adding the fact that the few losses they have are really bad losses. And then with the Giants, they've had a above average season, especially for their standards, but numbers-wise, they stack up so similarly to the Vikings. For this game, I'm going with my gut. Kirk Cousins has a very bad record in standalone games, so that just means that one of these games, he's going to have a meltdown. And I think with the momentum this Giants team has, especially with their brand new coach Daboll, this is going to be the game. I think the Giants come into Minnesota and they sneak away with the upset. I think it's going to be 20-17. And lastly, we've got the Tampa Bay Buccaneers playing host to the Dallas Cowboys. Now, both this season and last season, these two teams played in the very first week of the season, with Tampa Bay winning both times. Now, unfortunately for the Bucs, that first game against the Cowboys was the best game that they had looked all season long. Ever since then, their running game has been absolutely terrible. In fact, it's the worst in the league as far as how many touchdowns they've scored. And the best part of their game last year, their defense, has taken a step back too. Now, Tom Brady has still been one of the best in the league as far as how many yards he threw, but he has had a few more shaky moments than he has in years past. Now, as far as Dallas goes, their defense has been rock solid this year. And to add that with a double-headed monster of Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard, their run game's been really good. But the thing that I think will win the Cowboys in this game is going to be in the air. The Cowboys have scored the 9th most passing touchdowns in the league, while the Bucs are the 29th ranked team in the league as far as how many passing TDs they've given up. All in all, I don't see the Bucs getting much offense, and this is going to be Tom Brady's last game as a Buccaneer. Dallas wins 24-6. So that brings us to the divisional round. And first up, we've got the Chiefs taking on the Chargers. Now, although the Chargers get a good win in Jacksonville, that's about as far as their playoff hopes should go. Don't get me wrong, this is a good year for the Chargers, finally taking that next step and winning a playoff game. But if you ever expect to not only face the Chiefs, but to take them down in their own stadium at Arrowhead, you are sorely mistaken. The Chiefs have a top 10 offense on both the ground and in the air, whereas the Chargers are bottom half in pretty much any number you could think of. While the Chargers defense is pretty much bottom half, whatever statistic you want to look up. So this one's pretty simple for me. The Chargers put up a fight, but the Chiefs just take them down with ease, 34-17. Now, the other AFC divisional game is the Buffalo Bills and the Cincinnati Bengals. Now, if this happens, this is going to be a very surreal game, especially since weeks before we had that very scary Damar Hamlin incident. So is that going to play much of a factor in this game? I don't know, because if this were to happen in the playoffs, the game would be held in Buffalo, and the Damar Hamlin incident took place in Cincinnati. So although it is both of these teams facing off again, it won't quite have that same feel as if it were in Cincinnati. Now, when you look at it, both of these teams match up super well. This will be, without a doubt, the best game in the divisional round. This game is going to be an absolute instant classic, and I think Buffalo just barely sneaks away with the win being on home field, 27-24. Moving back to the NFC, we got the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the New York Giants. Now, I know the Giants are going to be rallying after their huge win against the Vikings the week before, but the Eagles' star power mixed in with the bye week, they're going to be too much to handle for the Giants. I think the dual threat with Jalen Hurts being able to both throw and run the ball, it's going to cause too many problems for the Giants. And in the other NFC game, we've got the 49ers taking on the Cowboys. Now, if this game were to happen, this is going to be publicized like you wouldn't imagine. You've got Brock Purdy on one hand, who wins his first playoff game, not even starting half of a full season, and you have the Cowboys, who won a playoff game for the first time in God knows how long. And like advertised, this will be a very fun game to watch. When you look at both offenses and defenses, they stack up pretty well. But the one key factor that one team has a lot of and one team does not is playoff experience. Seeing as most of the 49ers still on that team made deep runs last year and in 2019, that extra level you have to bring in the playoffs is going to shine through for the 49ers. And although it comes down to the wire, I think the 49ers pull off the victory 27-20. So, coming down to the final two games of the video. We're starting with the AFC Championship, where the Kansas City Chiefs take on the Buffalo Bills. Now, because of that Damar Hamlin incident that happened a few weeks ago, the Bills and Bengals game was canceled, meaning the Bills have only played 16 games in the regular season and the Chiefs played 17. Now, since that game in Cincinnati was canceled, the Bills missed out on potentially being the #1 seed. So, to keep things as fair as possible, if this game happens, the NFL has decided to play this game at a neutral site. Now, as of this moment, we don't know where that game is going to be, but regardless, both Chiefs and Bills fans are going to show up in numbers. And that's actually going to be one of my biggest keys as to who is going to win this game. Because the last two seasons when these teams met, it was in Kansas City, and the Chiefs just barely got by both times. Now that this game's not going to be at Arrowhead, I think that's going to be the small difference for this Bills team to pull out the victory. Whenever these teams play, the game of football they show is perfect, and sometimes it's even the smallest of details that can determine a winner. So saying all that, I think the Bills finally get over that final hurdle that they've always failed at, and that's beating the Kansas City Chiefs in the playoffs, which will get them to the Super Bowl for the first time since the 1990s. Bills 34, Chiefs 31. And finally, we got the NFC Championship, with the Philadelphia Eagles taking on the San Francisco 49ers. Once again, both of these teams are so closely matched that this is very hard to pick a winner. And although it's repetitive, I think there's one thing that makes the difference in this game. Teams traveling from the West Coast to the East Coast typically don't have a good record. And although I think the 49ers do have a better team, playing the Eagles in Philadelphia is just a whole different beast. The Eagles fans are going to be absolutely crazy, and that's what's going to be the factor that pushes them over the line. I think the Philadelphia Eagles win this game by a score of 24-21. So there you have it. Those are my Super Bowl predictions. The Buffalo Bills taking on the Eagles. Thank you very much for watching the video, guys. If you enjoyed it, please leave a thumbs up. And if you're new here, hit that subscribe button. And until next time, I will see you in my next video.